rap. It has this bad reputation. It's this book that so many people just, it's gloom, it's doom, it's depressing, and all that. And I don't think it is a depressing book. I don't think it was written to be a book to make us feel depressed. I don't think it was a book that its author intended, and God, in getting it into the canon, into our Bibles, intended that for that. I don't think when God inspired, most likely Solomon, to write this, I don't think he inspired Solomon to write this to be the divine, cosmic killjoy, just to be the, buzzkill book in the Bible, just to make us feel sad. I think there's so much more in this book. And it was J.I. Packer who said that about Ecclesiastes, speaking of the wisdom books in whole, but that the Psalms teach us to worship, and Job teaches us to suffer, and Proverbs teaches us what wisdom is, but it's Ecclesiastes that teaches us to live life. Because it is a book that is all about life under the sun, the life that we live, and as it is here under the sun, this world that we live in, the world that I wake up in, and maybe you wake up in the morning and you have aches and pains. Maybe when you stand up too fast and you're like, and your back hurts and stuff. Ecclesiastes is the book of achy backs and sweat and calluses. It is the book of real life under the sun as it really is. And as we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, again, it's a weird situation here because we kind of looked at this a couple weeks ago, and then last week there was nobody here, and I did something a little bit different. But I wanted to get back to this. And we kind of covered some of this before, but I wanted to look at the second half of Ecclesiastes chapter 3 mostly. And I wanted to kind of pick up, if possible, where we left off. And for those who weren't here, then I'm going to give us some recap here. But we have Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and as I was thinking about this again and afresh, looking over this and thinking about this now for almost 3 weeks, I was thinking how this chapter here is really this expansion on an idea that's expressed in Romans 8:28. That in Romans 8:28 we have this verse that tells us that all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. We have this idea there that all things work for good. And it's an idea that we like. It makes it on bumper stickers, it makes it on t-shirts, it makes it on coffee cups. But we tend to gloss this over and we're like, all things are good. But it doesn't say that. It says all things work together for good. Even those things that might not be good are part of what works together with God to accomplish good. And Romans 8:28 says that. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 has that same idea, but spelled out in all of its detail. Or maybe not all of its detail, but as much detail as humans we can take in. Because a lot of this is dealing with stuff, as this chapter is going to tell us, that there's a lot of this that is beyond our comprehension. We just can't know how some of this stuff works out. And so last time we were here, we talked about this stuff here, and we were looking at this flow of time here, and that's what Ecclesiastes 3 does. It shows us how this 8:28 flows out by showing us that everything has a time, that there's a time, and we see that in the first few verses there, and I'll read it out here in a minute, but we see that in the famous parts of Ecclesiastes chapter 3 where we are told that there's a time for everything, that there's a time to be born, there's a time to die, there's a time to plant, there's a time to pluck up, where you have this ups and downs and the flows of life, that everything has a time. And the language is there's an appointed time. There's a time when it was right to plant. Like a day like today, where it's as of me coming into this building with 6 inches of snow, who knows now. But obviously on a day when there's 6 inches of snow is not a day to go out and plow fields and plant. There's an appointed time for that. There's a time when it is right to do that. And so it tells us this with this times of life here. And last time, when we were looking at this, and it seems like forever ago, But I liken this to whitewater rapids, and I even showed a picture of it there, and I didn't show a picture this week, but whitewater rapids, where you have the ups and the downs and the turns and the swells and the eddies and all these parts and textures of the water as the water is going up and down and going all over and doing all these things. And these contours here are kind of what this is laying out here. It's showing us the contours and the ups and the downs and the twists and the turns and the waves and the eddies and all this stuff that is kind of the shape of the time of life that we live in. That we live in a life that is a time where in this life under the sun there are times to be born, and times to die, and times to plant, and times to pluck, and times to gather, and times to cast away. And there's all these times for loving, and times for war, and times to keep, and times to throw away, and times for love, and time for hate even, and times for war, and times for peace. That all these things have their times, and it lays out this contour of this thing here, this river of time that governs our life. And just like that whitewater rapid, I said, it's you can't, once you're in there, you're in there. I mean, there's no getting out. And that's kind of our experience with time. I mean, you can't stop time. As much as we might like it, 2020 became 2021. And in the blink of an eye, 2021 is going to become 2022. I was talking with Benjamin about some time stuff just yesterday, and I was telling him that he's 11 now. But in the blink of an eye, he's going to be 12. And then he's going to be 15. And then he's going to be 18. Then he's going to be married with his own kids. And this is life. It's time. It goes. And there's no getting off. There's no stopping it. And so Ecclesiastes chapter 3 here says, this is the world that you live in. This is time. And so when I say, what the heck does that have to do with Romans 8:28? Well, as our guide here, the preacher, I said, the author of Ecclesiastes calls himself the preacher. This is most likely Solomon. He wants to bring us here to seek out the meaning, to have this idea of Romans 8:28, but also expounding on that in terms of what it actually looks like, a life lived in time, to show us how things work together for good by highlighting to us in Ecclesiastes 3:11 that everything, he doesn't say that everything works together for good, but rather he tells us here in 3:11 that everything has been made beautiful in its time. That everything has a beauty in its time. And we might say, well, I live in a world that's not beautiful, Pastor. I mean, I live in a world that's not beautiful. I live in a world where there's screaming kids. I live in a world where I have to visit people in the hospital who are sick. I live in a world where people get cancer. I live in a world where maybe my political party wins, maybe they don't. I live in a world where there's pandemics. I live in a world where there's famine and fires and earthquakes and snowstorms. It doesn't seem beautiful. It doesn't seem beautiful. It doesn't feel beautiful. But he goes on to tell us that we can't figure that out. And before I get too far into this, I do want to stop and read this passage. So if you would join me in that, just to get the feel for that as we go into that. I'm going to focus mostly, as we talk about this, on the second half of the chapter, but I'm going to read the full chapter here to give us this texture, this kind of roadmap of time, and what the preacher has to say about that. And so we read in verse 1, "For everything there is a season, a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. And I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live, and also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. Justice, there was wickedness. In the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? And so we see in this a very sober look, and I mean sober in the sense of a very serious look, a very serious, not pessimistic, but serious look. This is the Ecclesiastes is kind of the we need to talk of the Bible. Like if your spouse or someone who's important to you comes up to you and says, we need to talk, you know that that's not going to be a light conversation. Usually that's negative, and Ecclesiastes says we need to talk. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it's talking to us about life and time, and it comes down to death. And we've talked about death some in chapter 2. But he tells us also in this that on this river of time, the ups and downs and the twists and turns, that this is all part of a tapestry that God is weaving in a sense, that everything is being beautiful in its time. And one of the largest barriers that we face, especially as we look at what happens in verses 10, 11, and following in that, one of the biggest barriers we face in life and in terms of understanding things, in terms of living our lives, is that we are bound by time, that we are stuck in that river, that I do live at a moment in a life that is defined by moments, that there's this moment, then there's this moment, then there's this moment, and this is something that I cannot escape from. And I mentioned this last time we talked about this. We can't even fathom God without even bringing this in. We talk about God being before time. We have to use even time language to talk about God not being in time. Because how can he be before something if a thing didn't exist? Well, he's outside of time. But we even then can't comprehend what that would be like, because our lives are so governed by time. And we're told here in this whole opening refrain, I do think that the point of verses 1 through 8 isn't so much to get on the balances of the positives and negatives and this and this and a time for this and this, but really it is about setting to us that there's a time for everything. And if I say to you everything, and I mentioned this last time, but if I say to you there's a time for everything, you'd be like, oh yeah, sure, okay. But the preacher wants us to slow down and say, no, I don't want you to think that what I meant was a lot of things. I want you to understand something, that when I said everything, I mean everything. And then goes on to tell us in these series of kind of back and forths of extremes, not just to get us on these ideas of the extremes of seeking and losing and keeping and throwing away and love and hate and war and peace, but to think of everything in between that. And everything is going to hit you differently. You're going to hear these words, and you're going to hear these back and forth and these spectrums, and you're going to hear these back and forth and spectrums, and some of those will be like, yes, I understand, and I know the time for this and the time for that. I've felt that, and I know that, and I experience that. It's going to hit us all differently. And so he wants to slow us down here and say, yes, there's a time for everything. And I think that the punchline to so much of this is verse 11, and we talked about that a little bit last time. And time prevented us a bit for going into that and moving on past that. But in verse 11, it gives us the heart of what this is all about, this God-shaped hole that's in us, by telling us everything has been made beautiful in its time. And we sit there and say, well, yeah, that's a hard thing to take in, but everything has been made beautiful in its time. And how is it that we don't understand it? How is it that when I look at the world, I don't see beauty? Why is it that I don't see beauty? Well, we're told, in a sense, why it is, that God has put eternity into our hearts, but we can't figure it out, that we can't find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. That we were created in Adam to be beings who were in God's presence, eternal beings living in the presence of God, who have now been cast out, not only cast out from the presence of God, but cast out from eternity. Now our lives are governed by time and death and aging. And so we've been cast out from this, yet there's still this thing in us, eternity. There's still this thing in us that we know there's more. We know there's something out there. That's kind of him defining the lines around that God-shaped hole. That yes, we were created for eternity and it's been put into us, but you can't figure stuff out because under the sun we've been separated from God, and so we can't figure this out. It's there, the yearning, the concept, the idea, eternity in our hearts. Yes, it's there. I feel it. I know it. I know there's more. But I don't know at the same time. I don't understand. I don't know how it all works out. I don't know what God was working out in the end, and I don't know where this is ending. I only see this moment of the tapestry that he's weaving. I only see the moment of this time here. And I know that there's more, but I don't understand it, and I cannot, because as I talked about last week from that song from Stephen Curtis Chapman, that God is God and I am not. I can only see a part of the picture that he's painting. This song from Stephen Curtis Chapman that I really like, it really gets to the point of this, is that God's God and I'm not. I can't figure it out. I am just a mortal man. But we want to know. We have this desire in us to know. Like, I need to know. Please tell me. And then we come up with all kinds of stuff to fill that in, to distract ourselves. But it's telling us here that, yes, everything is beautiful. And God has put eternity in your heart. And while that is a good thing and it points us to God, it also points to something that's missing in us because we cannot figure out what God is doing from the end to the beginning. But again, I don't think that the preacher who wrote this, inspired by God, wanted us to just be like, well, that's a big bummer. Oh, man. I think he wants to say, no, this is good. Take heart. Just like Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for good. This is a good thing. Okay, take heart. Because he goes on to tell us here, I perceive that there is nothing better than to be joyful and do good as long as you live, and that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in his toil, that this is God's gift. That yes, we have eternity that's been put into our hearts. An eternity that can't be fulfilled this side of heaven. An eternity that has been put into us that in the world under the sun can never be satisfied nor figured out. It's there. It's this mystery. It's this thing, this God-shaped hole that's been put into us. And you're not going to be able to figure out how God is making everything beautiful because you can only see this little snippet in this work that he's doing. He says, in that rest, take comfort that God has made everything beautiful. That even though you can only see this little snippet, don't worry about it. Because in the here and the now, and the life you live under the sun, God has made everything beautiful in its time. Maybe that time is now. Maybe you won't understand how it is until 1,000,000 years from now on the other side of eternity. But God has made everything beautiful in its time. Take solace in that. Take comfort in that. And then in the here and the now, enjoy your life. Enjoy your life. Work hard. Kick up your feet at the end of the day. Look at what you've done and say, man, that was a good day's work. It feels good to do a good day's work. And now I'm going to enjoy things. Go see a movie. I know no one sees movies here at Takema, but go see a movie. Right? Kick up. Play some silly game on your phone. Talk with your family. Go on vacation. Enjoy life. Because everything has been made beautiful in its time. And God has placed eternity in your heart. And you're not going to figure it out. You're not going to know how it all fits together. So enjoy the life that you have right now. Because the now that you're in is the time that you're in. There's a time for this and there's a time for that. There's a time for all these things. And whatever time you're in now is the time that you're in now. And enjoy it. Because in the end of the day, and I don't think the preacher is a fatalist here where he's just saying, what will be, que sera, sera, and just whatever. There's nothing we can do about it. He's saying, no, this is God's gift to you right now, the present. I can say, well, that's why they call it the present. That's true, though. We have right now. And God gives us right now to enjoy this. We have right now. And so he says, yes, enjoy the things right now because, yes, eternity, yes, all these things, but everything has its time. And the contours of that river that you're on, wherever you're in, if you're in the up or the down, and the twists or the turns, and the eddies and the waves, and all the things on that river of time, wherever you are on that time is where you are. And it's part of God's work, and it's beautiful. And there's nothing you can do about what time you're in this river. You can't change your time and say, nope, I want to jump up out of this river of time, and I want to be in this part instead. Be where you are and enjoy that. And he goes on to tell us even further, expounding on this, that whatever God does endures forever, and nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. Again, comforting us and telling us, again, yes, everything is beautiful. Enjoy life. With the thing that God is doing, the thing that he's doing that is going to be beautiful in its time, is something that stands forever. And nothing you can do can add to it or take away from it. God is working in this. Enjoy life. God has got this. Don't worry about it. There's a time for everything in life. Turn to him, find peace in him, because his work stands. And so we're told here that this enjoying of life is a good thing, that the things that he has done is good and perfect, and they stand forever. And we're even told what's more so is that God has done these things so that man will turn to him. And that reminds me of Paul on Mars Hill in Acts 17. And we're told here that essentially Paul taking this idea that everything that has been done is so that people would fear him. And when the Old Testament is talking about fearing him, it's not talking about, fearing him. It's talking about having that awe, that respectful awe of who God is in relation to who I am. And in Acts 17, 26 through 30, Paul tells the people in Greece, in Athens, and he tells them that he, speaking of God, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods. That's that time. There's a time for everything. He has determined the allotted periods and the boundaries of the dwelling place, that they should seek God, and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by art or the imagination of man. For the times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands everyone to repent. And so Paul here is saying, yes, God has set the allotted times and the seasons of life, and he's working all this in beautiful, and what he has done stands, and he has done this so that people will turn to him, so that people will see the things in this world and turn to him, that they will see everything is working out, even if we don't understand it all, that we know that there's something bigger, even if I can't figure it out. But knowing that, I will seek him. And we're told, as he takes this even further, that death, in the end, puts an end to our time under the sun. And we're told here in verses 16 and following here, as he turns to even more somber things, so this height of comfort, everything is beautiful, and find peace in life and enjoy life. And then he turns to, well, we're all going to die. He does get a little pessimistic, it seems, at times. But he says, moreover, and again, I don't think the attitude is pessimism so much as just realism. He wants us to see this as it is. Moreover, I saw under the sun that the place of justice was wickedness, and the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. And we're told here that the eternity in our hearts, these works of God, the flows of time, all these things all point us to something that's wrong with the world. Because why is it? Yes, I get that everything is beautiful in the world. And just like when I said to you, if I said everything is beautiful in the world, everything that happens in the world is good, you'd be, well, no, but it's not good. But it's not good, is it? Because even from a small thing, if I stub my toe, this isn't good. It hurts. All the way to our loved ones dying and people suffering and stuff. This isn't good. How could you say everything is beautiful when I know it's not beautiful? And he says, well, there is something wrong in the world, and that thing that is wrong is mainly sin, as he says here. That there was wickedness in the place of justice, and in the place of righteousness there was wickedness. Because instead of there being justice and righteousness in the world, instead of the world being this perfect thing that it was created to be, now it is a world that sin inhabits. And so, yes, things are broken and they are wrong because of sin. That's what broke the system. That's what broke the whole thing. And so it tells us here that this is on this terrestrial sphere, as far as we can see, that, yeah, there's brokenness, and there's things that are broken in this world. And 16 through 17 tell us about that by telling that even in this sin and brokenness and wickedness and things, but his response to that is to say, well, I guess that's that then. I guess everything's not beautiful. Instead, he says, I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked. For there is even in that, even in sin, even in the righteousness, in the wickedness, in the sin, in the unrighteousness, even in that, there's time for judgment. There's a time where God will make everything right. There's a time for that. And that while we may see injustice, God will have the last word. Part of the reason why our justice system was set up the way that it was, that it would be better to free a guilty man than to punish an innocent man, because the understanding was that we know God will have the last word. That's why we can say we're innocent until proven guilty. Because, yeah, you know what, maybe someone gets away, but they're never going to actually get away. Because as we're told even in Hebrews 9:27, that it is appointed for man to die once, and then comes judgment. So that there is no getting away from judgment. It's there no matter what. If it happens now or it happens in 10 years, when you die, or 20 years or 30 years or whenever that is, you will face the judgment. And maybe that time is set for now. Maybe you get the judgment now, but maybe you don't. And so the preacher here, Solomon, is saying, yes, you know, maybe this is the time, but maybe it's not. But God will not let these things go by. And he reminds us of that very aspect of saying that what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts, everyone dies. Everyone dies. So yes, you might see the righteousness, the wicked in the place of righteousness, and the wicked in the place of where justice is supposed to be, and you see the sin working its way out in the world, but it's all going to be righted in its time, because everyone dies. In verses 18 through 21, reminding us that we all really do die, and that we are not unlike the rest of creation in that. And I don't think that Solomon's saying that, yeah, you know what, who knows, we're just like the animals. I think he's just trying to point out to us, if you think you're going to escape death, there's something that you share with the animals, that you share breath, and you're on this earth, and you will die. And so he doesn't say, because even in chapter 12, verse 7, he acknowledges that the soul goes to God, where he says, yes, our spirit goes to God. He's not saying that, who knows? He's just saying, under the sun, in the world we live in, under the sun, the world that we see, who knows? You're going to die. The cows die, you die. We had a fish die last week. Things die. And you're going to die too. And this is what is the great equalizer. This is what renders even the wickedness that we see in life is going to end, because death. People die. And so even if they escape judgment in this life, even if the wicked seem to succeed in life, that even that doesn't last. Because even in that, people die. We see it all the time. Dictators die. Fidel Castro died. Right? Stalin died. Hitler died. Right? All these great people died. They all died. I mean, Genghis Khan, all these great military leaders and dictators and all these other people who lived in the world, everyone died. They didn't escape this, because the same fate of beasts is part of our life as well. We die. And so he says, yes, we die. And we know that when we are in Christ, we're told that by Jesus in John 14:3, that he goes to prepare a place for us, that I will come again and take you there to myself, and you'll be with me also. That in Christ, we have a place where we're going to go. But these verses here leave us longing for more. It wants us to want to know more. That you're telling me that there's righteousness that's going to be, that there's something beyond this, because I see wickedness in the place of righteousness. I see wickedness in the place of where there's supposed to be justice. I see these things, and you're telling me that it's going to be righted, but then that everyone dies as well. And it leaves us one more. So how do I reconcile this? But this is not a book written in a vacuum. And so we can turn to other places of the Bible where we see this. It leaves us longing for more. Who knows whether whether the spirit of the beast goes into the earth or the spirit of man goes to God? Well, I can turn to a passage like John 14 and say, Jesus saying, I go to prepare a place for you, and I'll bring you there myself. And I want to turn there really quickly, because after reading that, it's like, whew, that's heavy. And I want to go get that comfort. And that's what part of this is doing too. Taste the salt. So that when you go, you want to go get that water, and it's so refreshing. Oh, whew, man, that's really refreshing. It wants us to have this time to really dwell in this, to show us that the way of more isn't always what we think it might be. And so what? What does all this mean? Let's wrap this up in a neat little bow as best we can, right? What does all this mean? Everything's beautiful, but then it's not. Everything's good, but yet it's broken. We die, but that's not the end. Eternity is in us, but I turn to dust. What do we do with these things? Well, true faith learns to live in a world of seeming inconsistencies and the absurdities here, because we live on the promises, not by explanations. We try to explain these things away and we try to fill these things up, but true faith is about faith in the promises that God gives us. That even in the face of these things, even in the face of all these things that don't make sense, we fall on the promises of God. And we have promises right here. We have promises that everything has been made beautiful in its time. We have promise that, yes, eternity is put in your heart. We have promises that God has given you this gift to just enjoy life right here. He's given you things to enjoy right here. We are given promises that even in the face of righteousness and wickedness and injustice, that even in the face of these things that we see in this life, that justice will not be not served. That justice will always be served. There's no escaping it, because we all die. And so even when we can't explain life, we have to experience life, and either we endure it and we enjoy it. Our lives are defined by time, but they are part of this beautiful thing that God is doing in this world. And a beautiful thing that we cannot fathom, but that God is doing in us and through us. And we're called to trust in Him. That's faith. That's the faith we're called to. Our faith isn't about whether or not God exists, or whether or not the tomb was empty, or whether or not a man was nailed to a tree, or whether or not that man did these miracles. That's not the faith that we're really called to have. The faith that we're called to have is when we're in the time of war, when we're in the time when it's a time to die, when we're in the time of sorrow, when we're in the hard times. Are we willing to trust the God who says, I have made everything beautiful in its time? Are we willing to trust the God who says in Romans 8:28, that same idea, I'm working all things together for good for those who trust me, to believe in me? That's the true faith that we're called to have, to trust in the God who makes these promises, the God who says, I have promised you that if you trust in me, that if you trust, not just believe that a man was nailed to a cross and rose from the dead, but if you trust in everything that I say that means, that you will have eternal life. Because He'll judge it, He'll judge the unrighteousness. Because on the cross, Exactly what he says right here happened. Because in the place, a reversal of it actually, there was a reversal here. Because in the place of wickedness was righteousness. In the place of injustice, grace and mercy was found. Because on the cross, the one who is the perfect righteous one stood in the place of the wicked to bear the sins of all those sons and daughters of Adam and Eve who have eternity in their heart. So that yearning for eternity and the brokenness of this world could be met in him and met in his love, in his arms. This is Christ, the one who was nailed to a cross, because he is the one who created time. He started us on this river of time. He set us on this river where we're all the ups and downs and the ins and outs and all these things. But then he also entered into the time to redeem those cursed with the time, who were cursed with death because of sin. And he did that to take away the sin so that they could know true life. So that the yearning for eternity that was in their hearts could be fulfilled. So that they could see the beauty that God was making things. So they could see one day the tapestry that God was weaving. And that's our Savior. A good God, a Redeemer, who instead of, like the rest of Ecclesiastes, don't chase after the things and accomplishments and the things of this world, but seek him. Seek him. That we find rest in him. That in finding rest in him, that we can enjoy life. That's the big takeaway. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Because you know what? There's a time for everything. Whatever you're going through in life, there's a time for that. But there's also a time for the opposite thing. Whether you look in the world and there's so much stuff going on, there's headlines of there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's weather, there's power outages, there's pandemics, there's politics, there's all these things going on in the world, but there's a time for all of those things. There's a time for socially distancing, and there's a time for hugging. There's a time for pandemics, and there's also a time for peace and for life to return back to normal. And how that all works out, God's working it out in his time. And the big takeaway here is trust in him, because the thing that he does, as we're told right here, that whatever God does endures forever and is perfect. And it's beautiful. And if you don't understand how it's beautiful, that's okay. Just trust in him, because he is good. And how do we know he's good? Because of Christ. Because on that cross, wickedness was exchanged for righteousness, for no other reason than his love for us. We have a God who's bigger than all of that stuff. A God who's bigger than everything that we could face. So as we face the times and the seasons of giving and taking, reaping and sowing, birth and death, all of that stuff, in him and leaning on him, we can have peace and even joy. Because he gives us life. He gives us meaning. So we have a God who's bigger than all of it. And we turn to him, and if we trust in him, we can face tomorrow. There's a lot here. This is really just scratching the surface. You could go through this chapter and get so much more out of it just every time you go through it. But I hope that we've at least tried to put some handles on it to give us a grasp of what is he saying here. Enjoy this life, because God is good and he's making things beautiful and it's perfect. And if you don't understand it, that's fine. It's good if you don't understand it, because God's bigger than anything you could imagine. Trust in him. And so if you join me as we close in prayer. Lord,